Okay.
Brilliant. So hello, everyone. Welcome. My name is Samantha Musoke. I'm the IFR4NPO Project Director for Humentum, dialing in from Uganda, where I live. Well, I've lived for 20 years. So you're warmly welcome as participants representing a range of stakeholder groups from across Europe. This meeting is a series, part of a series of regional events that we're holding to promote engagement with the consultation paper. Thank you for those of you that have been through the change, where we've changed the format slightly from two-hour meetings to a longer three and a bit hour one. Thank you for your patience with us on that, but we think it will make for a better meeting. Be great if you could take the chance to introduce yourself just in the chat, just with your name, your organization and your country. That'd be great, so we know each other can see who's in the room. So our agenda for today, we're in different time zones, so it starts with the beginning of the meeting at 00. You can see we have got a lot to get through, so we will move fairly swiftly as we go through. If you have any comments or questions as we go along, please do use the chat function, and we'll do our best to answer these during the session or follow up after the meeting. We hope you're looking forward to sharing your thoughts in these times that we've set aside for breakout groups and feedbacks on the three topics set out. So today's discussion is intended to help you better understand the consultation paper and for the project team to hear your thoughts. So it's really a two-way conversation. It doesn't constitute a formal response to the consultation, so we would strongly encourage you to submit your own response separately, and we'll tell you how to do that later. Now, as it's quite a long meeting, there will be a break. As you can see, there's a 10-minute break, but hopefully you've managed to fix yourself up a snack or something to keep you going on something of this marathon meeting. If we were doing physical, it would have been 2 days in person, so this is a shortened online version. So let's kick off maybe with just a very brief project overview to set the scene and just make sure we're on the same page. So in March this year, the EU Commissioner, Janez Lenarčič, I hope I haven't said that wrongly, created something of a stir when he said that the biggest barrier to localization is the administrative capacity of local actors when it comes to accountability, transparency, and sound financial management. And in saying that, he implied that the reason that the EU and other donors don't give directly to non-profit organizations operating in countries where funds are needed is because of concerns about capacity and financial transparency. The capacity problem is only one side of the story. It's also about having an agreed standard to aim and work towards. So non-financial reporting standards do exist in a few countries where they define and harmonize accountability and transparency and have had a really huge impact on public confidence and the sector's credibility. But most countries, like Uganda where I live, lack sector-specific standards. So international financial reporting standards, developed with input from all stakeholders, are an important way to create a level playing field. I think it can be tempting to think of IFR4NPO project as a sort of techie accounting initiative, but its aims should really be seen in the context of localization, decolonization even, and shifting the power in our sector. So I am so excited that Humentum and CIPFA are at the center of this work. Appreciate these are long meetings, and the consultation paper is not a bedtime read. If you work for a non-profit organization or a donor, then responding to accounting consultations definitely isn't on your job description. But really want to thank you for being here and for engaging with this. So on this slide here, you can see the project's theory of change, if you like, in a nutshell. Some of the current challenges experienced by non-profit organizations, by funders, by auditors and regulators stem from this fact that there is no internationally agreed standard for non-profit financial reporting. So this results in inconsistency, both within and between jurisdictions. It results in duplication of effort, producing multiple reports for different users. It's a very big burden and has high costs, both on preparers and users. So a focus, what we've seen with donors is this focus on project-based reporting rather than entity-wide accountability makes double funding fraud harder to spot. And fundamentally, overall, what we see is it damages the trust and credibility in the sector and creates a barrier to funding. So it's our hope that once the guidance that we're developing is widely adopted by different jurisdictions and endorsed as best practice by donors, it will help build a more resilient and accountable sector. It will level the playing field for access to funding and bring more equity too. So who's behind this project? Well, it's being led by Humentum and CIPFA, both non-profit organisations themselves. So this project really is by the sector for the sector. To help us, we have a practitioner advisory group, or PAG, drawn from different parts of the globe and who have different roles in the sector as practitioners. And then we also have a technical advisory group drawn from the accounting standard setting community. And the project is overseen by a small steering group. And all these wonderful members work on a voluntary basis, and more information about them is available on the website. So I'd like to, I won't recognize all of them, but some of the people here with us today are members of the TAG and the PAG and the steering group. And we also have, I think, with us some country champions and some members of the donor reference group. So if that's you, please do make that known when you introduce yourself, if you have a role in the project. I know that Ian Carruthers and Tim Boyce-Watson are also with us here today from Humentum and CIPFA. So that's the sort of who is behind the project and how it's being delivered. In terms of the overall timescale, the project's been delivered in 3 phases, which is consistent with the processes used in setting all international accounting standards. We've just completed the first phase with the publication of the consultation paper at the end of January. And we're now moving into the development phase. And these meetings with you will provide really important input for the project's next steps as we develop the exposure draft. Our timetable for the rest of the project will depend a bit on the amount and the nature of feedback that we get to the consultation paper. But we're working towards a draft of the guidance for consultation in 2023, and then final guidance ready for adoption in jurisdictions that choose to in 2025. So you can see from this snapshot here that we have made fantastic progress in raising awareness and engaging stakeholders all over the world, including international and local non-profit organisations, regulators, donors, auditors, and the accounting community. In addition to the PAG and the TAG, we're supported by country champions, who you can see with the black flags, who help us raise awareness of the project in their countries. And we have some European country champions here with us today as well. And then we have a donor reference group that currently includes, for example, the World Bank, USAID, the Foreign and Commonwealth Development Office in the UK, and others. So with that very brief introduction, let me hand over to Karen Sanderson from CIPFA, who'll take us through an introduction to the consultation paper and our topics for today. Thank you so much, Karen.
Thank you, Sam, for that introduction. And as you've heard, the objective of the project is to produce guidance that is internationally applicable and can address known problems in NPO, non-profit financial reporting. The project has got 3 objectives for developing the guidance. The first is concerned with improving the quality, transparency and credibility of financial reports with international high quality guidance that is relevant no matter where you are in the world. That's what we're trying to achieve. The second objective is about providing information that is useful to users of financial reports for accountability and decision making, and in doing so, balancing the needs of users and preparers. And finally, the third objective is around addressing the accounting issues that are specific to non-profit organisations to promote comparability. And all of the proposals for development of the guidance will be made with reference to those objectives. So we urge you to kind of keep those in mind as a frame of reference for how we are moving forward. So where do we start? The consultation paper has been produced to develop the conversation about financial reporting for non-profit organisations across the world. It's the consultation, I can't get my words out. The consultation paper is there to engage with you and others across the world about what is needed to improve financial reporting for the sector globally. We're really aware that the consultation paper includes a lot of information. As Sam said earlier, it's not bedtime reading, but the main parts are in part 1 of the consultation paper and part 2. Part 1 covering general reporting issues and part 2 covering specific. So part 1 is divided into 5 chapters, and in our meeting today we'll be touching on all of those chapters, and they focus on which types of organisation we think will benefit from the guidance, who are the users of the information, and what is important to these users. This is at the heart of standard setting and the needs of users and producing information that is relevant and of common interest to them. And considering what this means in an NPO context is of kind of real importance to us. We'll also cover the 2 premises behind the guidance, which are in chapter 3. And then we'll come on to the final 2 chapters that look at the extent to which the current international standards meet the needs of non-profit organisations and the model we propose to use for non-profits that leverage both international and national standards. The consultation on all of these chapters closes on the 30th of July 2021. Part 2 of the consultation paper, as I said, looks at NPO-specific accounting issues. And the final session of our meeting today, we'll look at whether we've captured all of the issues and how we have prioritised them for inclusion in the first set of guidance. What you see in front of you on the screen is our prioritised list, but that may not be where we end up following the consultation. So the issues today cover all aspects of financial reporting, including revenue, expenses, assets, as well as the presentation and disclosure of information. We're going to be holding further outreach sessions later on in this year to cover each of the part 2 topics individually. We won't be covering those today. Because there's a lot here and to give sufficient time for all of the topics to be covered, part 2 has got a slightly later closing date, and the consultation period will close on the 24th of September 2021 for part 2 issues. So I'm going to turn now to the first topic area. And we're going to cover in this the definition of NPOs as well as identifying stakeholders and their needs. So I'm going to sort of turn to what I'm using the term NPOs, which may not be a familiar term to all of you. And so just to explain, we're using the term non-profit organisations in this project to cover a range of entities. But you may be more familiar with terms like NGOs, charities, recognising that we're covering things like churches, membership organisations, charitable trusts, universities, hospitals. It's such a broad range of types of entities, and that's why we're using the term non-profit organisations. Because of this diversity, we don't believe that internationally it will be possible to provide a single definition that will work for everywhere in the world. So in this consultation paper, we are proposing that non-profit organisations are defined by reference to 4 broad characteristics. The characteristic approach that we're proposing means that an organisation might be an NPO if it meets any combination of the 4 criteria on the slide. It's not a checklist, it is characteristics that might exist. 3 of the three of the characteristics are concerned with organisations working for social benefits rather than for making a return to investors. These characteristics include delivering services for public benefit, surpluses or profits being used to deliver services for public benefit, together with assets not being held for investment, but again, to deliver social benefit. And so the key point across all of this is about being an organization that is not generating a return for investors. It is all about the purpose of the organization and serving communities, that the public and kind of a whole range of stakeholders. We've also included a characteristic about voluntary donations in the proposed framework. Voluntary donations can be significant to some non-profit organisations and can be an important way of distinguishing non-profit organisations from the public sector, where the taxes that we pay, I don't think any of us would describe as being voluntary. So perhaps an important point to raise there. We recognise that definitions of non-profit organisations already exist internationally, but these are not designed for financial reporting purposes. For example, the statistical framework used internationally to define non-profit organisation doesn't properly recognise that some entities produce profits that are used for public benefit. And there's a bit of a blurry line between them that's kind of illustrated by the dotted line on the slide in front of you, where private market bodies in the statistical framework we might consider to be non-profit organisations for financial reporting purposes. So what we need for financial reporting doesn't always quite fit with widely used statistical framework, although many of the underpinning characteristics are the same. So I'm now going to turn to stakeholders and their needs. The consultation proposes 4 main stakeholder groups: service users, that are those people that benefit from the work of a non-profit organisation; resource providers, those are the organisations or individuals that provide funds and assets. This could be through donation or through commercial type of lending from banks. That covers both of those. The other area is around regulators, those that set the reporting requirements or the legal frameworks for non-profit organisations with which they must comply. And finally, societal accountability. This is important because members of the public, even if they are not direct users of services themselves, trust that non-profit organisations are working in the best interest of their communities, and the public at large are members of these communities, so they also have an interest. So as well as proposing 4 stakeholder groups, the consultation paper also proposes 4 main areas of interest for stakeholders, which capture their needs of financial reporting information. The first of these is whether a non-profit organisation is meeting its objectives. Is it delivering what it said it was going to do? The second is about how it does that. So is it doing it in a way that maximizes efficiency, economy, and effectiveness? And thirdly, also about how it does it. So doing so, is it doing it in a way that complies with the restrictions and the regulations, which would also include restrictions over how assets might be used? And finally, is the non-profit organisation operating with regard to its longer term health? In other words, does it have sustainable operations to meet its purpose? So those are the 4 areas that we think may be of interest to stakeholders. And when met, these needs are intended to support accountability to a full range of stakeholders and their decision making. I need to emphasize here that these needs are not focused on any one stakeholder group. but on the general needs of stakeholders, the things that they have in common. So I'm now going to turn to chapter 3 of the consultation paper, which has 2 key premises that we're proposing to underpin the basis of the guidance. We see these as essential to meeting stakeholder information needs and also the guidance objectives. So the first premise is that the guidance will be accrual based. The chapter notes that the types of financial reporting carried out in jurisdictions will depend on a number of factors, which includes the requirements of local financial reporting guidance, in some places the legal form of the entity, but also critically for some jurisdictions, the influence that donors have over the financial reporting of an entity. So the consultation paper looks at 3 bases of preparing accounts. It looks at cash, modified cash, and accrual. And just for clarity, what we mean by that is by cash, we mean that economic events and transactions are recognized when cash is received or paid, and assets and liabilities are not recognized. By modified cash, we mean that some economic events and transactions are recognized on a cash basis, and others might be on an accrual basis, which means that some assets and liabilities are recognized, but not all of them. And then the third one, by accrual, we mean that economic events and transactions are recognized when the event occurs and all assets and liabilities are recognized. So those are the 3 bases that we cover. And in the chapter, we compare the advantages and disadvantages of each of these bases in terms of how they meet the guidance objectives that I outlined earlier. The analysis acknowledges possible challenges around existing knowledge and capability to use accrual-based standards, and also the potential for complexity that it might introduce. It also acknowledges that donors may require cash-based information or information that is not on a full accrual basis as part of its reporting. But the chapter explains that accrual-based accounting is internationally recognized as the best basis to achieve a comprehensive view of an organization's financial performance and position. It improves quality and transparency of financial reports and enhances accountability and decision-making. And that's why it is the first of the premises that we have. The second premise is that the guidance will include non-financial reporting in its scope. Arguably, non-financial reporting is more important for non-profit organisations than it is for other types of entity, as it provides an opportunity to explain more about what the organisation is delivering and that wouldn't be found in traditional financial statements, and very important to stakeholders. So non-financial reporting might include areas such as an entity's nature, that is the purpose of the organisation, its objectives and forward strategy. It could also include information about risks and regulatory compliance. And non-financial reporting could also be used to demonstrate the impact that its projects and programs are having and the benefits that its wider activities are making to communities. So non-financial reporting can provide context to the financial information. It can also provide additional information about the organisation's activities that are useful to meet broader information needs of stakeholders. So that's a bit of a whistle-stop tour through the first 3 chapters of the consultation paper. So we're now going to look to move it into our first breakout session. But before I do that, I just want to explain briefly how that's going to work. So we're going to move you into groups, and that allocation will happen automatically. You'll be randomly assigned to a group. Please remember the room number that you've been assigned to, just in case you lose connection and we can rejoin you to a group. We will be asking that 1 or 2 people from each group act as a spokesperson to feed back on behalf of the group at the end of the breakout session, and we'll leave you to determine who that's going to be. A moderator has been assigned to each group, and their role is to encourage you to contribute, keep you focused on the questions, but also probe the reasons for your views. They'll also help keep time. So their function is there to help the group operate as effectively as it can, and they're not there to be the spokesperson for the group. Just in terms of protocol, we'd ask you to put your hand up if you'd like to contribute so that the moderator can call you in. It would be great if you could avoid talking over each other. If for any reason a moderator disappears, please keep going. And we would ask that the last person who was speaking call in the next person to give it a bit of order. If you have a member of any of our advisory groups or country champions or donors in your group, they are not there representing the project, they're there representing their own views. So they will contribute on that basis. We'll put the question that the group is looking at in the chat so that you can see what that is. And if not doing so already, we would ask that you put your camera on when you go into breakout. It just really helps the discussion if the moderator can see you and your body language and your desire to contribute, so that would be really helpful. We are going to be recording the breakout sessions, though those recordings are purely for the benefit of the project team and they will not be published. So please be frank, open, honest in the feedback that you would like to make. The main session is being recorded and will be published, but as I said, not the breakout groups. So here are the questions that we'll be looking at, and each room will be assigned one of these questions to look at. The first question is about who are the key stakeholders for you and what requirements currently exist for non-financial information reporting. The second question is about what accountability arrangements to stakeholders exist. And the second part of that is about how accrual accounting could support accountability and financial management. And the third question area is about the accounting basis for general purpose financial reporting in your jurisdiction, and also goes to how NPOs are defined in your jurisdictions as well. So those are the questions that we'll be looking at. We'll be putting you into groups, as I said, automatically, and you'll have about 30 minutes to cover each of those areas. Sam, is there anything you wanted to add just before we move people into breakout groups?
No, that's fine. Great.
So Andrew, could you move people into breakout groups, please?
Yes, will do.
I'm going to stop sharing that for a minute. It'll be great now to kind of hear some of the key points from your discussion. So it will be good if you can, in your feedback, sort of keep it to sort of the top 3 or 4 points that you want to make. If we've got a couple of groups who've answered the same question, if you are lucky enough to be called in second, if you could kind of just, if you've got any different points, add to that rather than repeating what's been said, so we can make best use of this plenary time together. So I'm going to go to room 1. Who's in room 1?
I didn't see the room numbers.
All right, I'll call it out slightly different. Shagun, can we start with you?
Yeah, no worries. Thank you, Karen. Yeah, so we had the question that we had was who are the key stakeholders for NPOs in your jurisdiction, and how does these align with groups outlined in the consultation paper? And then we also had a follow-on question asking about non-financial information reporting. And
Okay.
so Laura has kindly offered to feedback.
Great, thank you. Thank you, Laura.
So in terms of the stakeholder groups, we broadly agreed with the groups that are outlined in the consultation paper. We talked about service users in particular. We talked about donors and funders, both institutional and individual. NPOs themselves having a very strong sort of stakeholder role there. The one group that we talked about in a little bit more detail was the one of regulators, and the need perhaps to disaggregate that group a little bit and to pull it apart and think about what regulators actually could mean in the widest possible sense. So potentially talking about public bodies in the wider sense, and the need, I think, for them to have a greater understanding of NPOs and how they operate, because of the vastly increased contributions that NPOs actually make to the way that society functions and the way that communities operate nowadays. So we talked about the fact that, for example, law enforcement bodies maybe need to have a much stronger understanding than they do at the moment of how NPOs actually function and how they contribute to community work. We went on to talk about non-financial reporting, and it was very interesting in our group about the experiences that we have, the different experiences that we have, and the different requirements that exist at the moment. So, for example, we talked about the fact that in the UK, all larger organisations that are charities report under the Charity Statement of Recommended Practice. Interestingly enough, in Scotland, there are even requirements, for formal requirements, for very small charities to report on their kind of narrative, their non-financial information, how they operate, why they do what they do, who's actually involved in making the decisions within the charity themselves. And we contrasted that, for example, with Switzerland, where no requirements exist at the moment for non-financial reporting. We thought that was a really interesting kind of comparison. We went on to talk about the fact that smaller organizations very often have even a stronger need to demonstrate the capacity and the capability that they have to be able to deliver on funding that they're given. So that need to tell the story of how the NPO operates is very, very strong, from very, very small right through to very large organizations. We talked also, therefore, about the kind of challenges that are presented when there is detailed guidance on narrative reporting, because sometimes there can be a risk that actually good narrative reporting kind of becomes much more of a tick box exercise than it should do, as opposed to really thinking about what does this mean for the specific organization in hand. Lastly, we concluded with a point about accessibility of information and the fact that narrative often provides a much more accessible way for us to understand, for any user to understand what actually is going on in the NPO, than purely relying on numerical information, which can sometimes be quite challenging to the ordinary reader, if you like. That's a good summary, I think, of where we got to.
Great, thank you very much, Laura. Some really interesting differences between what's happening in jurisdictions, which I kind of, for us kind of demonstrates sort of why we need to do this, because we have got such differences, and great to hear your feedback about the stakeholder groups as well. What I'd like to say, if anybody would like to add, who's in Laura's group, would like to add to what she said, please feel free to do so in the chat. We're happy to get contributions through that mechanism. But that was great, Laura. Thank you very much for that. Sarah, can I turn to your group next? I think you were also answering the same question.
We were answering the same question. Thank you, Karen.
Great,
Absolutely, indeed. We had a very brilliant discussion on very similar issues, but I'd like to introduce Joanna, and my grateful thanks to Joanna for volunteering to do the presentation. I think she can augment what Laura's already said.
Great, thank you, and thanks, Joanna.
So our group, we also had a mixture of one Swiss contributor and lots of UK representatives. Our Swiss contributor was a CFO, and she was explaining how it's really important for there to be a standard that's well understood and applicable in multiple scenarios. So, it's important that it should be something that can be trained on, because the cost of training can be burdensome, time and cost, and so it needs to be with the outcome of something being a standardised approach. She explained the need for the information to be standardised for funders. She talked a little bit about how different funders require cash or accruals and why that was a really important element of your consultation. And also about maybe there need to be some variation in the requirement depending on the mandate and the area it's covering. So is it a local or a national or a global requirement? And maybe there needs to be some options and allow variety. In terms of the stakeholders, we agreed that your consultation paper covered the key ones. The one where we felt there was an additional group of stakeholders is about people that are involved in the NPO itself. So those charged with governance, whether they're trustees of a charity, the staff who work there, and the volunteers that give their time to the NPO as well. That's a really important group of stakeholders. Their needs are very diverse though, so it's hard to put your finger on what the information needs of those people are. We talked about the variety of NPOs and how a lot of our expertise was about charities in the UK, but also noting that housing associations and education entities would also be classed as NPOs. And so in the UK, there are different statements of recommended practice for those groups, and it would need to be something that was relevant to all of them. The importance of ESG and impact came through in our conversation. And we all agreed that was a really important part of the non-financial information. The other element of non-financial information that I didn't see covered in the consultation was about the governance aspect of the entity. So sort of there are different types of legal entity, there are different sectors, who's in charge of making decisions, how are decisions taken, and generally, how do you know, sorry about the dog barking, how do you know it's a well-run organisation doing what it said should be doing?
Okay.
I think I've covered most of it, and I'll mute now so you don't hear the dog barking. Sorry about that.
Thanks, Joan. I think we've all got used to strange noises and things going on in the background over the last year or so. So that was fine. I think it fits with the norm. That was great. Thank you so much for that. I think some really important points there about donors and standardization, and the need to have one set that people can be trained in. That's really important, and interesting to get your feedback as well about the stakeholder groups. On the non-financial reporting side, the ESG thing is sort of growing in profile, so something that we kind of need to keep a focus on. And the governance impact, I think there's a thread there. I think it's important that we make sure that we bring that out really, really clearly. So thank you very much for that. That was really good. Thank you. So I'm going to move on to Sam next. Can you?
Great. Yeah, thanks, Karen. So in our group, we looked at the question of what formal accountability arrangements to stakeholders exist in our jurisdictions and some of the advantages and disadvantages. And then we looked at the question of accrual accounting and how it might support accountability arrangements. So 2 questions. We had people from UK and Ireland and Bosnia in our group, and a mixture of non-profits and a donor who won't name because she's not representing the donor, her own opinions, and Roberta, who's our wonderful country champion for the UK with the Charity Finance Group, has agreed to feedback. So thank you, Roberta.
Thank you, Roberta.
Hello, hi everybody.
Hi there.
I recognise quite a few faces, so hi to everybody. Yes, so I'm feeding back for our group. So first one, formal accountability to stakeholders. So as you know, in our group we had UK and Ireland and also Bosnia, and we talked about the essentially the differences. I think it's come up in another group already that obviously in UK and Ireland we have we have different regulators in Scotland as well. We have the charity SORP, so there are lots of kind of formal arrangements in place. Whereas in Bosnia, it's a different situation. There isn't a regulator for NPOs, and we talked a little bit also about the difference between or the importance of tiering for accountability and for reporting. So Tony from the Wheel was in our group as well, and Tony and I are both on the UK Charity SORP review, and tiering is a big issue there. So we talked a little bit about how the issue of tiering also comes in, or could potentially come into the discussions that we're having on international standards, and what's appropriate for different levels. We also talked a little bit about the fact that donors can nevertheless continue to request special purpose reports, and that the IFR4NPO project does have a donor reference group, or donors feeding in, which we all felt was very useful to get that perspective. And the hope being that with perhaps more standardized reporting, that could eventually or potentially reduce the burden for differential reporting. However, we can't rule that out, but that's something to kind of consider. And certainly Alma, our representative from Bosnia, was expressed the feeling that having some sort of standardized reporting would, even at a basic level, would really help. would really help in reporting back on EU funds, for instance, and things like that. Moving on to accrual accounting, how can accrual accounting support and improve accountability and financial management? I think we had general consensus that accrual accounting is helpful. Does it help to improve accountability and financial management, because it gives that fuller picture, it gives that transparency. We talked a little bit about how in some cases there might be a situation where you might be able to see a hybrid situation in place, where you have accrual accounting but also cash reporting, and that some donors prefer cash accounting, and therefore the need to nevertheless keep that within within consideration. And we also talked about the fact that the accounting basis and size of organisation, again linking back to the tiering issue, is probably inextricably linked. That we don't want to overburden smaller organisations with complicated accounting standards, but nevertheless, for larger organisations, we felt general consensus where we felt it was appropriate to improve that transparency and accountability.
Great.
I think I've covered the main points, but if there's anything else.
No, that's fantastic, Roberta. Thank you very much for that. Some good points coming out of your group. And as before, if anyone in Roberta's group would like to add anything, please put any comments in the chat. So thank you very much for that. That was great. Can I turn to Tim next and your group? I think you were also looking at that question. And just before you introduce your spokesperson, can I just ask that whoever speaks next, if you can just try and keep to the main points, because we're getting pushed for time. So it'd be great if you can look at the things that we're just adding to the picture. So Tim, tell us about your group.
Well, I'll help you out in that we didn't get onto the accruals question. So my two stakeholders will feedback mainly around the sort of the pain points of accountability in their current context. So it's Gavin from Gavi, which is, you can explain exactly how that works, and Kira from Concern.
Okay. Great. I don't know which of you is going to go first.
I'll jump in first. It's Gavin here from Gavi. I was destined to work from Gavi from the day my parents named me, so that's how that works. And in fact, all through school, my nickname was Gavi, so it's okay.
There you go.
I think that we tended to agree that the general purpose financial reporting requirements are well met at our end of the market, the larger organisations, but also that the main point was around that donors definitely have the power and are given the opportunity to demand the reporting that suits their requirements. And often that's because the readers of their financial statements, for instance, demand a certain level of information. So at what I call the corporate end of the non-profit organisations, the largest organisations tend to have the biggest donors, and therefore the special purpose reporting requirements are very much focused on those organisations' needs. So I made the comment that, you know, having a clean audit at our size of organisation kind of just keeps you in the game. But if the large organisations require special purpose reporting or reporting in a certain format or form, then they get that reporting.
Yeah.
And I'll throw the ball to Chara.
Great.
Problem. Thanks, Gavin.
Thank
Yeah, maybe just to add to it, I suppose we did have a mix, obviously, with Switzerland, Ireland, and UK. And while, you know, SORP isn't mandated in Ireland, as we heard earlier, Concern actually does adopt it. So in terms of kind of, you know, the reporting that's there, it's very demanding, but at least what it is, the advantages of it were that, you know, you are kind of being very transparent. And I think a few of the other groups mentioned that earlier. And then obviously, you know, between kind of UK, Ireland, you know, we have a charities regulator in Ireland with the Charities Commission in the UK. So there's a lot of people kind of keeping us on our toes. You know, and then while we're following that, then, for example, Gavin was saying, you know, they work under US GAAP. So even just within the kind of sector itself, we're all using kind of different, you know, main standards. And I think, yeah, just the donors thing was kind of one of the issues we were saying, because all the donors have different reporting requirements, and that is really probably the bigger issue for us, because it's very hard to be trying to, you know, have one finance system that meets all the requirements of every single donor. So you have to go down to the nth degree on your financial systems in order to be able to provide many different types of reports. Yeah. So that's kind of the, you know, the disadvantages of you know, working in a kind of a more international sector, I guess. And yeah, one of the things we mentioned then was just from an international perspective, I guess, was because you know, a few of us would be in different countries, that has its own issues then as well, because like we're set up as a branch, but other organizations, other not-for-profits are set up as individual legal entities within the countries. So again, they have different reporting requirements within those countries as well. So trying to get everybody together from a massive international perspective is a big ask, I think.
Yeah, great. Thank you very much for that. Glad that you reinforced the challenges of this project, because I think we recognise that there are some big ones, and also very pleased to move on from Gavin, where I was being very distracted by the ocean waves and the palm trees, and wishing that I was there, but maybe at some point we'll be able to do that. Thank you very much, both of you, for that. And just to move very quickly on to our final group, Christine, I think you have the final group.
Yes, we have the final group, and we have looked at two questions to discuss. First one was, how are NPOs defined in your jurisdictions? And the second part of was, what was the accounting basis in general for general purposes financial reporting for NPOs in your jurisdictions? For that, we have two spokespersons who is going to feedback and give a summary of what we have discussed. So I'm kindly thanking Paula and then Paul to take over.
Great, thank you very much.
Okay, so I was just, I'm just going to cover off the definition of an NPO. So in our jurisdictions, I'm not sure we're coming up with any, it raises more questions, but I suppose the main issues were, you know, non-government seems to be something that we accept these organizations should be, but then Philip clarified that actually an organization might be set up by government for a non-profit reason, and maybe that does come into the definition, and it's about comparability. This is about comparability and not excluding organizations for that reason. From somebody in the UK, Paul raised in the UK that a definition of an NPO would be a charity, but then it was raised that, you know, in Ireland, for instance, social enterprises come into that definition, should be non-profits, and it's about their constitution and their wind-up clauses in terms of where their assets go on
on termination, that came into it. So it's complex. Social enterprises should be included. It isn't just about companies. That isn't a requirement. So it's quite open. The final point that was raised by Phil, I think, in concern was around for-profit organisations who work at a local level providing services, but they are for-profit. And again, Philip clarified that it should be included. So those organisations are delivering a not-for-profit purpose locally and can be included. So it's a complex discussion.
It is. Great. Thank you very much, Paula. Is that Paul who's coming next? Thank you for that.
Yeah. So looking at the accounting standards, again, there's not a huge amount of consistency across it. So UK, Ireland, the charities SORP and so similar are being used. So that's accrual-based accounting with cash-based accounting being used for the smaller entities. Other jurisdictions, so Switzerland, Austria, Germany, not necessarily any specific requirements there. So entities are using either the sort of general accounting standards or they're using a cash basis, but there's no specific requirements. And we also flagged up a couple of other issues where you've got organizations working internationally. You may have a headquarters using accrual accounting, local branches, or using cash accounting. So there's the consolidation adjustments to be made for year end. And also the fact that donors are requiring different information. So in Ireland, for example, small entities that are reporting on a cash basis may be required to provide accrual accounting for some governmental donors.
Cool. Great. Thank you very much for that, Paul. I think some interesting input from you all generally. And if anyone does want to add to any of the contributions made, please feel free to add it into the chat. And thank you to all of our spokespeople in that session. I'm going to move us on now and come back to the slide deck and into the next topic. Apologies, I have a bit of a delay on my laptop in being able to move the slides on. Oh, here we go. Right. Okay. So now we are going to look at what guidance already exists and how that might be used to develop guidance specifically for NPOs. We're proposing to start with guidance that already exists because it will help us to produce guidance more quickly. Starting from scratch to develop accounting standards takes a long time, and we are hearing frequently that the need is now. So we want to try and make an impact sooner rather than later. So in our work, we've looked at existing international guidance as well as national guidance, and a number of countries have developed NPO specific standards for use by non-profits, as we've just heard in that feedback. Our experience is that national guidance tends to be built on the standards that are being used in the private or public sectors, and in some jurisdictions it's a bit of both. And our experience is also that the NPO specific guidance that's developed is designed to meet country-specific contexts, which takes account of legal requirements as well as community expectations. So there can be some differences. And we've also seen that international guidance can be built on an international framework or on local GAAP. Again, there is some variety. So that means that the national guidance that exists can vary in relation to individual topics. As well as that, although national guidance is developed through local due process and has well thought out positions on topics, because it's built in an individual country's context, it hasn't gone through international due process as part of its generation. So the international frameworks have that benefit in terms of global due process. It's currently adopted international and kind of recognized conceptual basis. So to increase the likelihood of adoption internationally, the view of the project team is that non-profit guidance should be based on an international framework that has been through international due process and that has an accepted conceptual base. So having concluded that international guidance would be a better base, in chapter 4 of the consultation paper, we examine the extent to which the 3 existing international frameworks, IFRS, International Financial Reporting Standards, IFRS for SMEs, and International Public Sector Accounting Standards, would allow the project objectives to be met. And to do that, we assessed each of those frameworks against 3 criteria: whether the framework addresses NPO-specific issues, the likely familiarity that non-profit organisations have with the standards, and related to that, how easy it's likely to be to actually use one of those frameworks. And then we also looked at the feasibility of producing guidance within the project resources and timeline. This analysis showed us that no one framework performed well across all of those criteria. Ipsos performed better on NPO-specific accounting issues, particularly where there are transactions related to social benefits, but IFRS for SMEs performed better on ease of use and feasibility. Primarily because it's a single standard that's intended to be used for a variety of bodies. And some of the complexities that exist in IFRS and Ipsos have been removed, and because it is updated only periodically, it's a more stable framework on which to build. And we also think that it's going to be easier to build on this framework within the resources of the project. So that was our analysis of the existing frameworks. And with no one framework sort of standing out, we are proposing a model that basically utilizes all of the frameworks, but the bits that most help NPOs. So we're proposing a model that uses IFRS for SMEs as a foundational framework for NPO guidance, given its stable base. But to address the NPO specific issues that we know that it's weaker on, we're proposing that full IFRS and Ipsos and their conceptual frameworks are also used where there are gaps on the NPO specific issues. And then we're also proposing that the model builds on national guidance as well in providing NPO specific reporting solution. And we think in adopting this approach accesses the most appropriate elements of existing guidance, again, without starting from scratch. In the chapter, we acknowledge that there may be concerns about using different sets of guidance and that might lead to inconsistencies. That's something that, as I say, we acknowledge, and the differences between IFRS and Ipsos actually primarily relate to specific public sector issues, which in some ways is not dissimilar to the kind of approach we're taking here in that it's the different issues that we're trying to separate out from the foundational guidance. So there are a lot of consistencies actually between IFRS for SMEs and Ipsos. And indeed, where national guidance is either built on or aligned with any of those frameworks, there's a lot of consistency. So we expect that any differences will be minimized in terms of this approach. That's again a whistle-stop tour of chapters 4 and 5. So we want to move back out into breakout sessions again. And we again have 3 questions to look at in this breakout session. The first of them is about knowledge of international frameworks in jurisdictions amongst NPOs, auditors and stakeholders. The second question is about what would help in adopting the model that I've just very briefly outlined? What would help? What would make it more difficult? And then the third question is about the importance that you place on international frameworks, given national guidance that exists, and why that is the case. So 3 more questions. Again, we're going to push you out into groups. This time you will have about 20 minutes to go through your questions. So Andrew, could you, without further ado, push people back out into the next session?
Quite a big diversity in our group. The trends are that the larger NPOs have a better understanding of the international standards than the smaller NPOs. That said, in each and every country, we notice that the preparers, the NPOs, usually know what they need to do and their local standard. For example, for the UK, they're quite well aware of the SORP and what they need to apply under the law. Likewise, in Switzerland, if they need to apply Swiss non-for-profit standards, they're well aware of it. But they lack understanding of international standards. The current challenges is that there is no, let's say, one model that fits all because of diversity in the NPO base and what their needs are. And while the larger NPOs will be certainly more agile because they are better equipped to adopt any form of the new international standards, it's actually the suffering group will become the smaller NPOs, which precisely don't have the capacity to adopt. So it needs to be simplified to a certain extent, but also not too much. Otherwise, it won't be applicable to the larger NGOs and they will feel it doesn't respond to their needs either. We have also received very high interesting insights from the field, from international NGO concerns, saying that in parallel, in several jurisdictions, they develop their own standards, which is even worse because that requires then maintaining dual database. And likewise, what we've heard with SAM last week in Russia, it turns out they're also developing their own non-for-profit standards. So the challenge is, if we don't go live with this project, very soon the empty space will be filled in individually by governments, and that will create even more complexity. So that was, I hope that was
great. No, thank you, Karina. Really clear and interesting to hear kind of that diversity of view in your group. Thank you very much for that. And as before, if anyone from Karina's group would like to add, please feel free to add any comments to the chat. Sarah, can I turn to your group next, please?
Yes, certainly. We had the same question, so I won't read that one out again, if that's all right. I'm sure you were aware of that anyway.
Yeah.
And we had very UK-based room, but we did have some international contributors as well. So Shane has very kindly agreed to summarize for us.
Great, thank you. Hi, Shane.
Hi, how's it going? So just in terms of our group, just to add to the points that were already raised, and just in terms of knowledge, the point was made that particularly for Irish or UK-based NPOs, that using the SORP, because it's been there for so long, people are quite familiar with it, but may not realize the influence that the IFRS for SMEs already has had on it in terms of its influence on FRS 102. So the change might not be as significant as people might fear, and fear being an issue that would be there. Again, the tiering issue came up from 2 points of view, as has already been mentioned, in terms of the impact it would have, as an issue for its acceptance. One was in terms of the smaller NPOs that would be impacted, but also the point that was made that actually moving entities from cash to accruals accounting might be a bigger shift than moving them from, say, a national-based framework to an international framework. In terms of the other issue, then other issues that were raised just in terms of it was, while moving everyone to an international framework and using those as the basis for an NPO one, the challenge of course, remains that they're designed for for-profit entities. And obviously, then you would have to deal with the underlying applications or interpretation if the underlying standard itself was to be changed or updated, and how that would impact particularly on the sector. Point was also made that internationally, I suppose auditors would be more familiar with IFRS and IPSAS than say the national, unless they're doing it from a national point of view. From a stakeholder point of view, the point was made, donors would probably need to embrace it, and that would be one of the key groups that would need to take it on board. And again, as the point was made, some countries are already moving to implement standards, and particularly, for example, the example that was given was the Horn of Africa, where quite a number of countries now require NGOs to file under IPSAS. So that was the feedback from our group.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. Another lot of ground covered in your group. Thank you very much for that. Really great. I'm going to keep us moving. If I can turn perhaps now to Christine and the question that your group had a look at.
Yes, we had looked at the importance that we place on using the existing already international frameworks for MPO guidance, and what would be that importance. So we had a few people from UK, I mean from IFS actually, and Ireland as well. And now I'm gonna hand over to Jenny, who is our spokesperson, to feedback from our groups.
Great, thank you. Hi, Jenny.
Thank you. Hi. I'm not sure I've got too much to add to what's already been said, as obviously we were also a UK and Ireland based group, although with international experience, because our standards are already IFRS based. But I take the point that was just made that although they are, some of the people applying them may not appreciate that to the fullest extent. But given the existing framework, the application of those principles should be well understood. I think one point that came out that was different and interesting, again, we picked up on the point about tiering or the spectrum of entities, both in terms of size and complexity. But it was that there are perhaps different ways of managing the impact of that. And you know, large international organizations probably have some choices about the extent to which some of the requirements are fed out to the sort of furthest extent, and to the extent that there are sort of central adjustments done for things. And so that might have an impact on implementation. But I think also support for the idea of something that's internationally based, and noting that the challenge really will be balancing the different factors in those situations where we're needing to fill a gap, and what is the best solution in those situations, and which one of the different sources do we draw from.
Yeah, okay, great, thank you very much, Jenny. Great, that was really interesting, and a common theme of tiering coming up through all the feedback. Tim, can I turn to your group next, please, the last group?
Great. So there are two people that were voluntold or that volunteered to feedback, and it relates to two of the challenges. One was around the challenge for small entities, which has come up quite a lot, and the other was if we can't shift the donors, that it will be very challenging to implement the new guidance. So it's Una and then Mustafa.
Okay, great, thank you.
Hi, I suppose we were looking really at the fundamental framework and whether that would be supported. And I think the idea was yes, that it seemed to be the right approach to start with the IFRS for SME, reasonably simple, straightforward standard, build IPSA on top to the extent it's necessary. But the big concern, I suppose, is that suits the larger and the kind of properly resourced charity, but there's a big concern at the bottom end of the charity market that there's not an overburden on that end, that they have a framework that they can work with which meets the needs of their stakeholders, which may not be the same as charities which have the larger donors coming into them. So we really need to make sure that there's not an overburden there. And one of the contributors also raised the issue of, you know, a larger charity having smaller branches around the world in different countries, and imposing that type of full IFRS for SME regulation on those smaller branches might absorb a lot of resources out of the charity. And we need to make sure that branches of a main charity can somehow rely on the larger charity financial reporting. So that they were the main two aspects. I'll hand over to Mustafa now.
Great, thank you very much for that. Mustafa. Hope we haven't lost you. Ah, no, excellent. I think you might be on mute, Mustafa. Great.
Sorry for that.
It's okay.
Thanks, Una. And basically, I like to highlight a few challenges, which are the areas we need to be looked at before setting up an international standard, particularly between the donor communities. Till to date, there is no standard reporting format agreed between the donor communities. So the European Union is looking for a report in one way, another one organization is looking for another way. And before setting up any standard, if it is a consensus with the donor community to get a international standard reporting format which can accommodate all information in a same manner, then it will be clear out a lot of complexities. Policy types, some of the for the NPO sector need a standard policy, which might be a combination of IFRS for SME or for the IPSAS, but need to be looked at before that to standardize few policy issues like the overhead cost allocation policy, your fixed asset accounting policy, your FX policy. Particularly those type of things is the gray area still exists in the NPO world with the donor, because each organization is determining their own policy and there is no standard set up as yet. And finally, towards the even to the local government regulation, like as Shane mentioned, few other presenter already highlighted that IPSAS already roll out in few countries. So if the new standard came and need to be roll it out to those countries, that need to be how that things will be amalgamated and how that things will be moved out from that country, because a country is a major issue. Local legislation for an international organization.
Yeah.
That's all.
That's a lot. That is great. Thank you very much. Thank you to both of you in your feedback. I mean, you know, the donor points are, as you might imagine, a recurring issue that we're hearing from people across the world. So really interesting to get your perspective on that, and also your thoughts about the model and the ability to apply that. And some really good points there about the impacts on smaller organizations that we need to take into account. So thank you very much for that. I'm just going to share my screen again, just for one final slide before we break. I'll just try to bring that up.
So I know we've only got like 3 minutes till the break, and I'm sure we all need a break. So we thought it would be a great opportunity just to let you know that much as we've shared some fantastic things in this meeting, they don't constitute a formal response. We still would love you to hopefully be inspired by what we've talked about and submit a formal response. So what we've gone through so far is for part 1. And we hope you're keen to respond. So we've tried to make it as easy as possible. And there are 3 different ways you can share your views. So if you go to the website, it's all there. So the first is that if your organization already has a process for submitting comments on accounting standards, then you can submit a comment letter. And if you don't know what that is, don't worry, that's not for you. If you'd like to submit a response as an organization, or you'd like to collaborate with others or work offline, there's a second option, which is to download a Word template and then upload the completed version via the website. And then there's a third option, which is great if you're submitting as an individual, which is an online survey. And there are separate surveys for part 1 and part 2. And once you've started and input all your basic personal information like your country and your stakeholder group, etc., you can save it and come back to it until you're ready to submit. So that way we've tried to make it as easy as possible. So really hope you feel motivated and confident to submit a response, even if you've never done anything like this before, because a large number of responses from all regions of the world will add quality and credibility to the guidance that we're able to produce. So we're going to take a 10-minute break. Please don't go away. Please come back. Some people have been putting in the chat that they'll see us next week. Just a reminder, there is no next week. We changed the format. So we've made today's slightly longer. We're going to go on for until the 1/4 the next hour. So another hour and 15 minutes. And we'll be then looking at individual accounting issues facing MPOs. So we'll see you in 10 minutes. Thank you.
See you back at 1/4 the hour, whichever hour you are, wherever you are in Europe. So see you very soon. Thank you. Sam, can you let me know when people look to be back, because I have my screen up so I can't see.
Well, it's hard to know, but hopefully people might turn on their videos. If you're back and you can hear me, if you could turn on your video to let us know you're back, that would be super. We're looking to restart any minute. I think we needed that 10-minute break. It's been a marathon, hasn't it? But brilliant conversations. I think we can probably, start. Do you want to resume the recording, Andrew? And off we go.
Okay, great. Well, welcome back, everyone. It's good to have so many of you return for what is the last session. I think, as Sam was just saying, if you heard, it's been a bit of a marathon. So we're into the final stages of it now. So one more session to go, and we're done for today. So the breakout session so far, I've been focusing on part 1 of the consultation paper. We're now going to look at the points that are made in the overview section of part 2 of the consultation paper. And the overview describes how we've identified MPO specific issues, what they are, and how we've prioritized them for inclusion in the guidance. I think, as I said at the very beginning, we're not going to look at individual issues today. So if you're excited by that prospect, we'll invite you to future events about that. The consultation paper talks about the different sources that we've used to get to our long list of issues. And that includes previous research, input from standard setters and from the advisors on our group. So multiple sources that we've used, and we've created this long list, which is in front of you. To help us think about these issues, we've grouped them into issues about reporting entity, issues about incoming resources, issues about outgoing resources, issues about the balance sheet, and then finally issues relating to the presentation, content and scope of financial statements. I don't know if any of you have counted, but there are 22 issues on the slide in front of you from the research that we've done to date. They are pretty diverse, and they range from the definition of fundraising costs. I think overhead allocation was mentioned earlier, but fundraising also comes up as an issue, to how to account for inventory that is held to distribute to service recipients. And as part of the consultation, we are wanting to know whether we've captured all of the issues that people are experiencing. Are there any missing that should be on the list? Or actually, do you think that we've got something on the list that really shouldn't be there, and we could take it off? But with such a long list of issues, we need to decide where to prioritize our efforts to achieve the highest impact with our first set of guidance. So we intend to focus on those issues that could add the greatest value globally within the project timeline and resources, and obviously those are constraints for us. So again, we've taken a criteria-based approach to this, and we've used 4 criteria to help us prioritize. The first criteria is about prevalence. So is the issue widespread globally? You see it in many, many different places. Does it have a consequence for readers of financial reports? If we don't deal with the issue, will it impair the ability of users or readers of the financial reports to obtain useful information for accountability and decision making? So a real consequence for users. The third criteria that we've used is about demand. Has the issue been raised by multiple stakeholder groups or single stakeholder groups internationally? So this is about the push from constituents to actually try and resolve the issue that they see that's there. And then the final criteria is about feasibility and whether we can find a technically sound solution within the time and resource available and not adversely impact on the completion of the project. So for example, we don't want to spend all of our time and effort on resolving one issue when actually, if we'd have chosen a different set of issues, we'd have been able to tackle more things that our communities are facing. And in using these criteria, we've prioritized those that to us appear to rate the highest across all four of those criteria. So we may have one issue that's really high on one of them, but we're trying to look across the board in terms of choosing the ones that we want to take further within this first phase of the guidance. So, and as part of the consultation, we are asking whether this is the right way to prioritize issues. So we really captured it for people that are there. And oh, sorry, my computer is stuck, which is really unhelpful. So we have in the consultation paper identified 10 topics that we want to prioritize or look to us to be the ones that we should prioritize for the first set of guidance. And that is using the criteria that I just outlined to you. If I can just pick out a couple of those to kind of just illustrate the kinds of things that we're thinking about. So we're proposing to include non-exchange revenue. And non-exchange revenue would include grants received, cash donations, gifts in kind, and services in kind. And based on the input we've had so far, our understanding of the issue is that this is about recognition, it's about measurement, and also about disclosure of amounts. Another one just to pick is around classification of expenses. So in this one, we're looking at what sort of analysis should we use. International standards allow either analysis by nature or by function. Do we have a view about which one works best for MPOs? Do we have a view about whether certain categories should be always included in MPO financial statements? So those are the kinds of things that we're looking at there. And then a third one just to pull out is financial statement presentation. And in this topic area, we're looking at how funds with restrictions are presented in the financial statements, a term commonly used as fund accounting, and how that would appear. As I said, we have picked out these issues because they are prevalent. We think there are consequences for readers if we don't address them. We think there is a demand globally because they've come to our attention, and we think we've got the resources within the project to address this. And the consultation paper, asks us whether we've actually got the right issues. Are these the right issues that we should be looking at? We're going to move on to another breakout session with that brief introduction to that. But before I do that, I just wanted to touch on donors, which have come up a couple of times already. And we've heard a lot about the implication of donor requirements. You've heard that we've established a donor reference group as part of the project, and we're doing this to better understand the perspective of donors and the extent to which we can, through this project, get greater consistency. So we're building that into the project itself in terms of how we're thinking about it. But in terms of moving into the next session, we're actually looking at the accounting issues rather than the kind of donor reporting issues specifically that you either directly encounter or you are aware of from the people that you deal with. So breakout time again. And another 3 questions to look at. In the first question, we want you to kind of focus on sort of the top 3 financial reporting issues. Through this question, what we want to try and get at is why these are the most important to resolve, and perhaps thinking about it in the context of the criteria that we looked at to help us think about that. The second one is a broader question about what are the most significant accounting issues that you face in your jurisdiction. And then the third question will be about how getting common solutions to these issues will help improve accountability and decision making. So as before, we're going to put you into breakout groups and push you into those now. Similar to last time, we'll give you about 20 minutes to discuss this topic. So Andrew, if you could push people into the groups, that would be great.
Can I just ask if people who have you not received a sort of an invitation to join the other groups?
Yes, I did, but then I got timed out and I had to sort of come back in again.
Oh, really? Okay. Okay, let me see.
That was me also.
Sounds like that's a common experience for those that are still in the room.
Okay, testing my skills here now. Sorry, just hold tight.
Through the power of the internet, we will move you somewhere else.
So I don't understand why you're not receiving. All I can do is move you to another room.
Don't need to be in the same one either.
No.
Sorry, I'm just trying to work this. I'm just going to have to put you with another group. Numbers might be out.
You have 3 groups, yeah?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think the numbers might be a little imbalanced now. Eastern, hi.
Hi, Eastern.
I'm going to move you to another group.
More waving goodbye.
The numbers will be imbalanced. There you go.
So how many do you have in each room?
I just need to work that out now.
You can still move people around if you...
Yeah, Eastern's still not been...
And Sam, we've got back.
Great, thank you, Andrew. Well done. Sorry for the last minute. I hadn't seen your message, so I'd agreed with Tim, and I was then in a different conversation. But you were perfectly done. All good.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So yeah, group 2's got 8, and the others 1, 2, 3, 3. 4.
We had little difficulty in people moving into groups.
Yeah, they're roughly balanced. I think group 3 might have a couple more, but I think they're roughly balanced.
Fine. Okay. Cool. Yeah. Excellent. Good stuff. Okay.
And it will make, I think, having fewer reporting back, so towards the end when people are a little bit flagging, it will make the reporting easier.
Absolutely.
Done.
Yeah.
Done a super job as a producer. Is this your first time doing it?
Still put a bit. It is, yeah. I'm sort of trying to work it out. Yeah.
That's great stuff.
No, it takes a bit. It's actually, there aren't many things you can do, and you don't get a lot of feedback when you set up the breakout rooms as to what's going on, and you can't do much once they are set up. So, but there we are. You know, once they've opened, I mean.
Yeah. Well, we'll have a bit of a debrief at the end. Hopefully, able to stay for the last 15 minutes, and we'll hear from sort of the moderators what their experience has been like.
How it went.
Yeah. How are you feeling so far, Karen? How's the longer?
No. It's fine. It's fine. It's all going kind. And Tim, can we start with you, please?
Great. So my group was very lively. We had no problem reducing it to 3 top issues. Gavin's going to explain.
I don't know whether Tim and I quite count the same way, but our 3 issues are really probably 8. So I think that we had a number of issues that we talked about. One was around, again, donor requirements, cash accounting for inventories, how we account for donations in kind, having to have a consistent framework, the difference between cash accounting in branches and consolidation on an accrual basis. We talked about fund accounting and how we value assets that are not necessarily trading assets, the likes of heritage assets and those things that can't be traded. We talked about the difference between grants and contracts and you know, what are we actually accounting for? And we talked about revenue and how important that is as a measure of the strength of the organization. But I think underlying those 3 issues, we talked about, you know, mainly accountability. So the likes of inventory, you know, how does the accounting for inventory on a cash basis or a non-cash basis change our view of our accountability responsibilities, and how does it demonstrate that we're being accountable, and how does that kind of look into the budgeting process? And I think you can roll quite a few of the topics that we had into that whole theme of how do we demonstrate accountability and how do we help management manage. So the burning issues for us were, as I say, a kind of a layer level or a level higher than 3. Over.
Okay. Thank you very much. I think Tim described the word lively. I think the way that you presented it made it sound like it was pretty lively in terms of the discussions that you had. And sounds like you covered quite a bit of ground in your conversation, but interesting that you came kind of back to the point about accountability as the common denominator in terms of the issues that you thought were important. And that's quite a valuable thing for us to take away from that conversation. So that's really great, and thank you for that. So thank you, Gavin, for that. As before, if anybody who was in Gavin's group has got anything else that they want to add to what Gavin has fed back, please do include it in the chat. We're always interested to hear what you have to say and your feedback, so that would be great. Thank you very much, Gavin. That was fantastic. Going to move on to Christine next. Could you tell us about your group and who's going to speak on behalf of it?
Okay, we have looked at question number 3 about how getting a common solution to our accounting issue will improve the accountability and decision making. We have Bara will take over to respond to this.
Brilliant.
Thank you.
Hi.
Thanks, Christine. Hi.
Hi.
Yeah, so Laura started off, I mean, I think there was broad, the overall agreement was that this commonality would help. I mean, and the things that were generally touched on were in terms of aiding analysis across different entities or across different times, comparability, improving comparability. But Laura did initially also bring up the point in terms of although all else equal, it is commonality is a positive thing, and there's still a need to look at what the actual goal is and whether it is ultimately helping the end product to be understood. in particular mentioned, you know, that a complex common solution wouldn't be understandable and therefore wouldn't achieve the intended benefit. Una, in supporting commonality, you know, just again mentioned that it sets a bar against which the different entities can be judged, and it might have a positive, or it doesn't in and of itself improve governance. Sorry, and she thought that perhaps that an agreed common solution could help with the issue of complexity. As it thought that the common solution helped accountability from a global perspective, and pushing back on something Luna said, it was less clear whether or not it helped from an internal point of view. Kira referenced that it would be useful in terms of different entities, that, you know, from an international NGO perspective, working with many different entities, that common approach would help in terms of analysing different entities that we might intend to work with, or their performance over time. Paul just again said it, you know, it makes comparison easier, although there isn't necessarily a link between it and internal governance. And Philip again referenced the fact that it helps comparability and decision making. We moved on then to sort of other solutions and other issues. Kira brought up the issue of in the international NGO context, corporate governance structures, mentioning, you know, that certain procedures might be appropriate at the HQ level, but if they were imposed upon every part of the organisation further down, mentioning branches, that it might actually increase complexity and resource requirements and pull those away from other areas. So it wasn't a one-size-fits-all solution in that sense. Philip then says something that I can't remember my notes say. Sorry, Philip. And then it struck me as interesting in the end that the localization agenda had been referenced at the very start of this program, and I was just wondering, you know, is this addressing that in the sense that a lot of the smaller local entities we work with, you know, I wouldn't have seen as maybe being well placed to fully adopt any, you know, unified accounting standard. And then Philip kind of came in response to my query, and saying that, you know, it was understood that there were binding local requirements, and that the aim of this project was to put something out there that people could gravitate towards. And he mentioned if donors like this, that they would that they might gravitate towards using the information contained in the financial statements resulting from the standard. And he also mentioned that it fills the vacuum, that where states who don't have a national framework, they might naturally gravitate towards, you know, the result of this project. And S.A. Tao then at the end just again mentioned the complexity kills point, and that she had seen examples where end products were so complex that it had killed the intended outcome, and understandability wasn't there. So that was all from us.
Great, thank you very much, Bara. A kind of a range of positives in there in terms of the benefits through kind of comparability and that can come, and helping analysis and so on and so forth. But also some notes of caution, I think I heard in your feedback around complexity, a one size fits all. So I think back to the tiering point that we heard, and also whilst it might solve things externally, it might not solve things internally. So some things to look at there. That was great. Thank you very much, Bara. And so to close out the breakout groups, we'll turn to Sarah and the final report back.
Thanks, Karen. We had question 1, which is what we've already heard, but I'll do it very quickly because it was a while ago. And like Tim, we're not so good on the counting in terms of what are your top 3. We had a few more than 3. Accounting issues, why are they important to resolve? Are these the most important issues across your jurisdiction? Why would you prioritise some issues over others? And can I thank Tony from the Wheel, who's very kindly invited very kindly for his presentation in advance. Thank you.
Thank you, Tony. Thanks, Sarah.
Sarah, did you say I kindly volunteered, or I was very kindly volunteered?
I think the latter.
Yeah, the latter. Yeah, definitely the latter. But thank you anyway. So yeah, I suppose there's some commonality already, even though it's maybe a different question than some of the points that Barra fed back on. So in terms of the three, what were the three issues? I suppose we all maybe gave different issues. So it is more like Gavin, where the three became, 8 or 10. But if I can describe, sort of start at a higher level, and then I'll talk about some of the issues and then conclude. A point was made that simplicity, if I can call it simplicity, is important, especially for the smaller organizations. So it ties into that point of tiering again. So to make it easier for smaller organizations, you don't necessarily have to give them choice, because if you start giving choice and options, it means that organizations need to understand what the choices are and what the options are, and already that's making it more complicated for them. So a definite sense that whatever the direction is, or whatever the preferred outcome is, to try and make it as simple as possible for the smaller organizations. This is something actually that's come up in the whole SORP review process in the UK and Ireland as well. So that's one point. There were a number of points then, I suppose, about particular issues. One was on income recognition, which is already in that list of 10, I think, Karen, so the whole accounting for grants, be the capital grants, the accounting for, multi-annual funding, and how that can cause problems in terms of consistency and understandability of accounts. So income recognition. A point was made about reserves. So, the importance of having clear explanations of the rationale for reserves, and the holding of reserves, and the necessity of reserves, and the need for reserves from a governance point of view. Because, if it's not explained properly, it can often be interpreted as, an organization has funding left over that it's ultimately didn't use for a particular purpose. So the whole expansion on reserves was an issue. Support costs came up, and again, how that is understood, if it's commonly applied across different organizations, if it's understood the same way by donors. Mustafa made a point that, no matter how solid your own rationale for support cost allocation is, if the donor is looking at a different organization that does it a different way, it already is sort of undermining, in the donor's mind. So support costs came up. There was a brief discussion on foreign exchanges for organizations that are operational over multiple jurisdictions. So again, how that's approached. And a point was made about the narrative reporting. So if we're, aside from technical accounting issues, many sets of accounts for non-profit organizations include a storytelling aspect, if you like, in a trustee's report. So that is important, to tell the story, but also, again, not to become such a body of work that it becomes almost impossible to do it, or just frustrates especially smaller organizations. And then I think that was sort of the breadth of everything we were talking about. So there was no disagreement with the issues that you had put as the top 10. I don't think that we got to a point of saying that there were any three that were more important than others, but hopefully that gives a sort of sense of the breadth of things we discussed. And if I left anything out, by the way, please do chip in.
Yeah, fantastic. Thank you very much for Tony, for that, Tony. And as I say, if there are any other points, please do put them in the chat, and we'll pick them up from there. It's kind of really great to hear that like we're along similar lines of thinking in terms of the issues. That, you know, that's quite reassuring for us, but really powerful point about simplicity. And I think that kind of echoes a bit of what Barra was saying around about kind of, I like that phrase. I'm probably going to steal that now. Complexity kills. You know, I think that's an important thing for us to keep in mind as we go through the next piece of work. Thank you very much to everyone for the contributions that you've made there. It's been exceptionally helpful for us to hear your views on that. And I'm now going to hand over to Sam to close out and to talk about what the next steps are. Sam, over to you.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Karen. And just to echo that, thank you. Honestly, been really stimulating and interesting hearing the discussions and views and comments today. And this really helps give us a colour from a regional sort of perspective on some of the issues that we've been discussing. And although we're asking the same questions in each region, we do get a really different flavour of responses. So it's just been really, really helpful. That said, as I mentioned, your words today don't constitute a formal response. So please do submit those responses. We're going to send a follow-up email, which will have all the links in. So you can start getting those responses ready. Hope you can hear me. It says my internet is down.
Yeah, okay.
So as a reminder, the closing dates are the 30th of July for part 1 and the 24th of September, which sounds like a long way, but obviously you'll find it easy to respond to part 1 while the issues are fresh in your mind after our meeting today. So please do start the process of getting your response ready as soon as possible. So you might be curious to know what will happen to your responses. What's the next steps? So we'll be analysing them from Q3 this year, and then using that information to shape the development of the draft guidance. It will depend a bit on the quantity of responses, but our hope is to issue a draft guidance for comment in 2023. We'll also continue the outreach work following our stakeholder engagement strategy to try and ensure that all groups with an interest and with an influence over the outcome are aware and able to input into this consultation process. So how can you stay connected and engaged if you found this interesting and you want to know about future things that are happening? Please do subscribe to our quarterly newsletters, which will keep you up to date and also ensure that you are aware of any regional events. So I'm just going to pop that in the chat there. That's our link to subscribe to the newsletters if you haven't already. Please do join the conversation in the online forum, which is a place where stakeholders all over the world can connect. We can learn, share with each other, and you can participate in our hot topic series, focusing on specific relevant issue every couple of weeks. I have to say, unfortunately, it is down for maintenance at the moment, but that should be up again in the next week or two. So I do want to share that with you in any case. And then please do follow us on social media, especially LinkedIn and Twitter if you're active there. If you comment or like or share our posts, they get seen by more people and more voices can be heard. So we could really use your help with that. And as always, you can email the project, myself or the project email. You're really welcome to reach out and be in touch. We'd love to hear from you. So in the follow-up email that we're going to send, we'll put the PowerPoint presentation or PDF of it and the video recordings. And these will also be available on the website if you want to point anyone else to them. And if you have colleagues in other parts of the world who you think would like to come to a similar event for South Asia or Oceania or Central Asia, whatever, you can check out all the other events that we're running. This is, I've lost track of it. Are we on the 6th of 12, I think we are now. So there are more, you can see them all on that page where they are. And if there are other colleagues that you have, please do let them know so they can participate. So the very last thing I'd like us to do, if it's okay, I'm going to go back to gallery view. Would you mind turning on your camera? And I'd like to take a photo, if that's all right. I'll take off my glasses, find my print screen. And we'll just do 3, 2, 1, smile, and we'll get a photo shot. So 3, 2, 1. Lovely. Super. So that's it. Put my glasses back on now so I can see what's going on. So thank you so much. We really appreciate you taking a lot of time today and putting in some really good thought and reading and hard work. I can't tell you how much it means to us and how valuable all your opinions are. So thank you very much. Stay in touch, and we look forward to seeing you in our next series of webinars, which will be in July to September, and to stay in touch. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, everyone. It's been fantastic. Thank you.
Thank you.
So I explained that, then people were okay. They didn't like the idea. I'm going to be called on to adopt it, and then it's not. But at the moment I'm meant to be doing US GAAP, and so there's no way I can